If you find you're unsettled listening today, reach out to a trusted friend or go to tradespodcast.com and click on resources.
We are men in the trades, forging health in the drug poisoning crisis. This is
Off the Clock Toolbox Talk.
Today it's Deconstructing Your Inner Asshole Part 2. We're with Jason White, our special guest from Nightingale Electrical. Let's jump right in where we left off. Believe it or not, there are 7 types of inner critics, or we're calling them assholes in this particular situation. There are 7 types of inner assholes that exist, and I'm going to read through a few of them, and you guys can voice when you're recognizing them or resonating with them. And these 7 types of inner critics, they've been created by a psychologist named Jay Early and a social worker named Bonnie Weiss. So the first one is called the perfectionist. And the perfectionist wants you to do things flawlessly. And if you don't meet those very high standards, it attacks you. And it says, you will never do it right. Your work is worthless. Don't even bother trying.
Guilty.
I know about that guy.
I think one of you said that. I think that was
Yeah,
it, right?
I definitely said that earlier.
Okay, so that's definitely one of them. The second one is called the inner controller. It tries to control your behavior without any wiggle room, and if you slip, it blames you. It says things like, you did it again, shame on you, you have no willpower, and you are out of control again.
Guilty.
Yeah, I can relate to that one, but I've actually been able to start quieting that guy down quite a bit.
So you're developing some skills in that area. So that's very hopeful.
Yeah, but I don't know if I could articulate to you exactly how I developed those skills. So I would love to break that down a little bit, but let's keep hearing the other
the other assholes that are, because some people have all 7, so it's a lot.
2 for 2 right now.
Yeah. The taskmaster. The taskmaster tries to get you to work as hard as possible, even when it's impossible. They say things like, you're so lazy, rest is for the weak, you can't even achieve anything.
Yes, familiar.
Yeah, 3 for 3.
Okay. Number 4, the underminer. It tries to undermine your confidence and basically freeze what you're doing so that you can't move forward. Says things like, you're worthless, it's pointless, don't even try because you're going to fail anyway.
Yeah, do you think that's related to imposter syndrome as well, that one?
Yeah, and like almost everybody has imposter syndrome. So, and some people are just like, what? That's a thing? I've been living with it all my life, but there's other ones that are actually even more imposter syndrome. Number 5 is the destroyer. It shames you deeply by making direct attacks. It says, you're a big failure if people only knew who you really are.
Ooh, I've heard that sentence.
Yeah, so that was my primary inner voice for all my years in addiction. When I would see my reflection in a mirror, that was exactly what I would say to myself. You're a failure. You're never going to amount to anything. I'd look myself in the eye. I would say, you're a loser. You're an idiot. You're an asshole. You're never going to accomplish anything in your life. And it became it was such a core belief that, I mean, it was the narrative that was in anything. And then I was also simultaneously waiting for the people around me to kind of confirm it. So any mistake or any wrong move was an opportunity for somebody to be like, haha, see, he is a failure. Look at him. And I was just always, on edge for that. Since coming out of addiction and not facing that struggle and overcoming that for so many years, that voice is not prominent anymore. And put a lot of time and energy into recognizing that is not truth. What I was saying to myself, it was false. But I don't think that that's unfamiliar to a lot of people.
No, I felt that in the pit of my stomach when you said that. Like, it was palpable.
That's the same voice. And like, I if only people knew what you're really like, or if only people knew who you used to be. Like, it was even a voice that tormented me after I came out of addiction and after I moved on to the next part of my life, it was a voice that said, "Oh, but don't let them find out who you were."
Mm.
Mm,
You know, there was like it was a threat of shame that
mm-hmm.
lurked in the background.
You know, on that, Jason, there was a season of my life. I had a lot of relapses during my years, kind of trying to figure out the addiction thing and going through recovery. And there was a time I was just so fed up with repeating that pattern over and over and over again that I kind of figured, oh, I'm just gonna reinvent my entire life, my social life, and I had changed social groups to the best of my ability, and I had come into this new group where I was not going to let them know about my past. I was going to keep it a secret. I was never going to reveal that I used to have this addiction struggle. And that was motivating to me at the time. I thought it would be a new way to start a new life, but it all imploded fairly dramatically with another relapse in which every one of these new people in this social group discovered the truth about me because my past came roaring back. And I realized that, there was way more power in owning it.
Mm-hmm.
And there was way more strength in just letting it come out and letting people see all of who I really was. And that's not easy. I mean, it's not like, you should disclose every detail of your life to every single person you interact with.
Yeah, I agree.
But no, there needs to be some, caution and boundaries there, of course. But
Yeah.
for me, that was such a core part of who I'd been for so many years. I mean, a struggle with opioids that was nearly 15 years long. There was no way to hide it and pretend it didn't happen. And
Mm-hmm.
so for me, I needed to own that thing. And actually, by owning it and allowing that vulnerability to come out and for people to know this about me was empowering and strengthening. And that was one of the things that actually probably pushed me forward into more permanent change.
Mm.
And so I am keenly aware of the power of vulnerability and owning our stories and not allowing, those things we're afraid of and that we're hiding, those fears we have and the things that we want to keep in the dark.
Yeah.
Um, they seem to have a lot more power over us when they're hidden.
Yeah.
And when we
100%.
bring them out into the light and share it with the world, it's like it loses its power. And
And that's exactly why we're having this discussion today is we want to bring inner asshole out. And that's why we're deconstructing inner asshole to really understand what he is. And when we bring him out into the light, it's just like, oh, you're just scared. Oh, you're just trying to bring something to my attention. Oh, you're in pain, like and understanding what it is. And it takes away his power and it empowers the other parts of ourself to a degree take care of inner asshole to help inner asshole get what they need or to listen to the helpful parts of inner asshole's message.
mm-hmm.
You said in there like a part that really struck a chord with me, like when you kept falling into the same patterns and you were so afraid that people were going to find out about it. And I can remember kind of having the same issue myself and the shame that comes with that, right? And that you feel like you have to carry it around. And you know the feeling I always really struggled with is like, this isn't a problem for other people, like why is it a problem for me? And like, especially when it comes to like alcohol is a big one, weed's a big one, these ones where like they're socially accepted, and not just socially accepted, they're socially encouraged.
Yeah.
So when you're struggling with alcohol or you're struggling with marijuana, you're going like, how are, like, what's wrong with me? Why am I broken? And like,
Mm-hmm.
for me personally, one of the things I struggled with, it wasn't like a substance abuse, it was pornography.
Mm-hmm.
And like,
That's super
you want
common.
to you want to talk about a quiet shame that nobody wants to talk about.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you know, people are addicted to that all the time.
Yep.
They're feeding that addiction multiple times a day and they're not talking about it.
Yep.
They don't want to bring it up. They're ashamed of it.
Yeah.
They're ignoring their partners because of it.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, whenever people go to talk about it, they go, well, that's not a problem.
Mm-hmm.
What do you mean?
I think
Yeah.
people have a hard time understanding the consequences of a behavior like that. Like when we look at addiction, addiction by definition has harmful consequences. If you're not experiencing harm as a result, then technically it's not an addiction as far as the DSM-5 is concerned, and how they would diagnose addiction. Yeah. So when we look at pornography addiction, or people that are claiming or identifying a struggle there, I think it's a lot harder for them to articulate the consequences in their lives. Just like a lot of things, like the consequences of problematic substance use become apparent fairly rapidly, especially to the people around you. And most people that are having that struggle also can describe the harm it's causing. But how do you describe the way pornography is impacting your relationship? It's much more difficult to articulate that. And I think that when people can't put that harm into words, then it's just easier to hide it and pretend it's not a problem. And that's where shame kind of thrives, right?
Well, and it's subtle. Like
So
it,
that's what I was going to say, insidious.
it's not a problem at first. It doesn't change your behavior at first, but over time, as this, like the desire I have for my wife is encouraged by my libido, right? I want to be nice to her. I want her to be happy. I want us to connect on an intimate level because, those things are important driving forces to me as a man. But if I'm getting that satiation from somewhere else, then I'm not getting it from my partner, I'm losing that connection. And, that connection, that physicality is super important. And like, if you're not, if you're severing that connection, then, you're just roommates. Pornography can steal that connection from you, even if you don't want it to.
Okay, so we have two more, the last two. So the sixth one is the guilt tripper. It tries to blame you for specific actions and decisions you took or didn't take in the past. And it says things like, how could you do this? You're going to regret this one for the rest of your life. Do we resonate with that or
That
not?
one, that one's not me, but that's okay.
Yeah, that's
I'm
okay.
glad I'm not.
It's
I don't
probably
have
good
all
that
of
you're
them.
not getting 7 out of 7.
My expression is I used to be a goalie in hockey, and like you get scored on, and then you gotta forget about it and move on to the next one. Like you can't you have to have a short memory.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I apply that very much so to my life.
Yeah.
Okay, and the last one, the seventh, is called the molder, not like fuzzy mold, but like shaping mold. It tries to get you to conform even when it's not indicated. And it tells you things like do as you're told, keep your head down, stay in your lane. What will other people think?
I've shaken that one off quite well, but I relate to it, but it no longer runs me either. So yeah, there's still a few there, those first few were still resonating quite strongly with me. So there's some asshole deconstruction to be done yet.
Yeah, same. I resonated very much with a bunch of that at the beginning, but that one you just said, the molder, like, oh, I remember those days. I remember when I felt like that, but it's I've had so much success telling people what I think and putting my opinion out there that it doesn't make me afraid to separate from the crowd, even if it's unpopular. But I've made that mistake in the past and listened to that asshole in the past, and
Yeah.
I've had much more success no longer listening to him. And if I think something, to say something.
Okay, so wanting to move into connecting more of that softer side, we're kind of getting the aggressive side of self-compassion, or which is also connected to the asshole and the softer side. But we do need to understand what asshole actually does to our physiology when they are the loudest voice and they're the only voice that we're listening to. And it puts us into something called fight, flight, freeze, fawn. Have you guys heard of that before?
Well, fight or flight and freeze but not the last one.
Not the fawn one. Jason,
Yeah,
have you?
same. I've heard fight and flight. I used to hear that a lot.
Yeah,
And then it became fight, flight, or freeze,
yeah,
which actually made a lot more sense because I had seen that behavior and went, "Oh, that's one of those things." But I
yeah.
haven't heard fawn either.
Okay. So fight is basically about, it can be physical fighting where you actually break out into fisticuffs. Yeah, you're actually fighting, or it can be things like blaming, shaming, judging, including judging yourself. That's also a fight behavior. And then when we're kind of reading through these four too, often people tend to orient themselves more toward one or two of these. So kind of keep an eye out for that and then figure out which one or two you're kind of more oriented for toward. So that's the fight. The flight is like running away. And so for me, for a long time, it actually was physically running away. So I would deal with difficult things by going for a really hard run. This is when I was younger and in much better shape than I am now. Or it can be things like isolating, ignoring, procrastinating. For me, procrastinating specifically through TV, like I just want to like numb out basically through TV or through like something I can really lose myself in. And that's a flight behavior. That's a running away behavior. The freeze is about over identification or just getting caught up in the essence, like you get stuck in whatever it was that happened. You're ruminating, you're going over it again and again and again in your mind. That's kind of what the freeze, or freeze can also just be like where you don't know what to do, you're just stuck. You can't respond any which way, and afterwards you're just like, why didn't I do this, why didn't I do that? Because you were stuck in
Mhm.
freeze. And then the fawn one is the newest one. And the fawn one is basically about submitting to the threat. So you're over functioning, you're solving all the problems, you're not respecting your personal boundaries, you're appeasing, you're working way harder than you should be for other people's benefit, and it's not your benefit. That's what the fawn response is.
Hmm. Like, yeah, it's situational. I'm pretty evenly split, at least between fight, flight, and freeze.
Mm-hmm.
That circumstances kind of dictate which. And then just a thought on the flight, because I have a tendency to, with certain conflict, to kind of pull out, withdraw.
Mm-hmm.
But I find that I do that more intentionally because it gives me the space to reassess, gather my
Mm-hmm.
thoughts, kind of process, and then come back to it. So it's not a flight for the sake of leaving forever. It's
Mm-hmm.
like a temporary flight, and
Mm-hmm.
I'll come back to this once I've settled myself. So that, in that sense, that's maybe a healthier way of dealing with some things, because in the past, if I get forced into a situation that I can't fly away from,
Mm-hmm.
then I might have to fight, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
No, and there's compassionate elements to all of these too. Like, if this is what inner asshole is making you do, but there's elements to it that like, maybe you need to fight right now. Maybe you need to run away right now. Maybe you do need to work a little bit harder right now to get something else to happen, but it just can't be ongoing, like day after day after day after day. You're like killing yourself trying to get something done and you're not getting anything out of it and there's no end in sight. That's where it would be a damaging thing.
yeah.
I think as you described like all four things, I had memories in my mind of like each time I had done like one of those things.
Mm,
I would say I probably tend not to fight,
mm-hmm,
um, just to like avoid confrontation. But I can definitely think of a lot of times where I've been standing there thinking, listening to that inner asshole inside go like, "Oh, please try me right now.
mm-hmm,
Please, please. Like, I don't want to come out with this aggression, but I
mm-hmm.
will respond with lots of aggression. Please, please come at me." Like I've had that thought, a number of times. I think I'm probably prone to like flight the most as well. And
Mm,
I like the idea, Daniel, that you said like where you're like, I'm not running from the situation because like I'm afraid and I'm not going to deal with it and I'm going to totally avoid, but like I need to regroup. And like
Mhm.
I need to regroup because, I wasn't ready for this kind of confrontation, or I wasn't, maybe I didn't think about all the factors that I needed to consider. Maybe I'm not sure about how I feel right in that moment. And like, I don't want to act when, I'm not sure, which is also the same thing that causes me to freeze, where I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, what do I do? And you got a million thoughts running through your head and you're like, literally, what do I do? And nothing goes past there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know if this is exactly relevant, but I saw that freeze at work in my life. One of the ways my brain works is I'm very analytical. So I want research. I want to understand an issue before I act. And,
Mm.
my son was being diagnosed with ADHD when he was young. And so there was, conversations around medication and treatment, what's the best approach. And so I thought I'd really like research it. And it turns out there's experts that say, yes, you should medicate, and experts that say you should not.
Mm-hmm.
So I was really stuck
Hmm.
because the research wasn't helping. It was just causing me to freeze.
Mm-hmm.
And I had no way of sorting through that because the experts were contradicting each other. And so it was not an easy one to sort through because I couldn't rely on, the research. And normally we talk that way. I talk that way all the time. Like, oh, what does the research say? And, you know, what does the science say? Oh, that's a dangerous road to go down, isn't
It is now,
Yeah.
right?
it?
Yeah.
Well, it's not settled. It's not settled. And I wasn't settled. And, difficult thing. This is life, though. It's not always black and white. It's gray. It's messy. And
It's rarely black and white. It's always, this is the vulnerability, uncertainty part that gets most of us, that makes us all crazy, because we want definitive black and white. This is what you do. And even when we're talking about this conversation, we're kind of coming around the back end of this now. We're going to talk about what to do with your inner asshole and how you get him to settle down and play a positive role. It's not linear. It's not step one, step two, step three. It's kind of, I don't know, Daniel and I talked another episode about, it's kind of a journey that you go on. And it's annoying because it's like you need it clear. Step one, step two, step three. Tell me how to deal with this. But very few things in life are like that. Maybe construction is like that. Is that why we like construction? Because it's clear. You put this thing together with that and it makes this structure? I don't know.
I think maybe, yeah, but I hearken back to like the scientific method, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, what's the first step in a scientific method? You come up with a theory,
Mm-hmm.
right? And, you know, the way we've advanced in science over the years that we've been recording human interaction is that we've challenged a norm by saying this is what's accepted generally as truth. And a scientist says, I don't think that's true. And then he goes on to attempt to prove it beyond a shadow of a doubt so that it becomes truth. People used to think the world was flat, and then one guy said, I think it's round.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And then he proved it. So, that's science always goes up and challenges the accepted norm. And like, we can't get mad for people doing that. We need to continue to challenge accepted norms, because if we truly believe in truth, it will keep presenting the same thing to us.
Mm-hmm. Although there's the complication that humans are the most complex things to try to figure out. And like, if we're talking ADHD, for example, ADHD is a human disorder, but it can also be a symptom of trauma. It can also be a symptom of overwhelm. It can also be a symptom of lack of sleep. And it's actually the sleep patterns that are the problem. So you're medicating the ADHD, but it's actually because there's a sleep disorder there that's causing the ADHD symptoms. So it's so complex in how we approach it and how we look at it. And that's why the holistic health thing is,
I
is
wonder
important.
also if pathologizing it as a disorder isn't entirely the most helpful way of thinking
Mm-hmm.
about it. And I know
That's
a
what
lot
I
of
would agree
people
with.
with ADHD who have decided to not think about it that way, to
Mm-hmm.
rather think this is just my unique brain. This is
Mm-hmm.
how I was made, and this is who I am, and that frees them
Mm-hmm.
from the, it's when we label things, it's kind of a double-edged sword. I think sometimes it's a relief, like, oh, this is what I have, now I understand, but simultaneously it can be make everything worse. We pathologize it, and then it's like you lean into that thing,
Mm-hmm.
almost becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy or something of that sort.
Basically what they talk about for how to help your inner asshole calm down and not cause so much chaos and damage and pain in your brain is the experts, the researchers talk about befriending your inner critic or befriending your inner asshole. And they sometimes say, like, talk to your inner asshole as you would a good friend. For me, that particular analogy didn't work very well. I don't know why. Maybe I'm not a good friend, or maybe I don't talk like that to my friends. But for me, it was more helpful to be aware of, would I say what I'm saying to myself to my 4-year-old son?
Mm.
And honestly, it freaking breaks my heart now when I think about how I talk to myself. If I would have talked to my son like that, I can't even say the things that I used to say to myself. I can't say them out loud if I'm thinking about saying that to my son, because that it just horrifies me that anybody would ever say that to a child. But yet I would say those things to myself constantly all day because that was in her asshole going, right? So, what I found more helpful was to imagine inner asshole as part of kind of like a council of elders, or I don't know if you're into medieval stuff, a Knights of the Round Table in my head, where it's like inner asshole is one of the voices sitting around the table or one of the voices in the club. And there have been points where he's become so catastrophically out of control that curiosity, compassion, gratitude, insight, all those different things were creativity, were hiding under the tables and couldn't even give their voice because inner asshole had taken over. So, how do I restore the balance between my inner counsel so that asshole isn't the only voice? They still have a voice because they have something important to tell me. But then after they finish telling me, and I sometimes actually visualize, it's a little bit cheesy, but I'll be like, thank you, inner asshole. Can you please sit down now? I heard you. You had your say. Now I want to hear from gratitude. Now I want to hear from creativity. Now I want to hear from delight or awe or like all these other voices that are also at the table. What do you guys think of that strategy? Or do you have other strategies that you use to get inner asshole to kind of take a more reasonable place?
I think about my inner asshole's voice and kind of what it sounds like and how do I interpret it. There's probably a lot of people out there that think the same way, but I think about my dad, and it was a voice that I didn't always agree with, but I almost always respected.
Hmm.
So like now when I hear his voice, right, I go like, okay, like, yeah, that's great. That's a valid opinion, and it's important that it got said, and it will influence the decision, but probably not as much as it wants to.
Mm-hmm.
And it kind of works in two ways. Like I think about like when I was a teenager, and my dad yelled at me because of the decisions I was making, and I didn't agree with what he had to say, but I had to listen to it, and I still respected him. And then I think about him now that I'm an older man, and I I hear his voice and I hear his opinions, and I don't necessarily agree with them or listen to them, but I still respect what they are and where they come from because they come from a place of experience.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of when I hear my inner asshole voice, I'm going, he's saying that because he's been somewhere. He's he's
Mm.
trying to protect me. He's hurt, he's afraid. These things that are driving that asshole voice, they don't come out of nowhere. They come from fear,
Hmm.
shame.
Yeah.
Like they come from a place that's real.
Mm-hmm.
And it's uh that aggressiveness is a veiled attempt at protection.
Yeah. Because of my analytical kind of logical mind, I had to find tools that resonate with kind of how I think. And so during my years, kind of through addiction, journeying through addiction and into recovery, tried a lot of different modalities to help me with that. And the one that resonated the most with me was smart recovery. And that was because it's based in psychology, it's cognitive behavioral therapy. And there's some tools in there that they teach, one of which is really designed to help you dispute irrational beliefs. And so when I think about a lot of these things, at least the things that my inner asshole would say, they're irrational beliefs. And so using my logic mind, I take a look at how that's worked out in the way SMART teaches it, is that first of all, something triggers your belief, an event happens of sorts, and that is what leads to an emotional response, behavioral consequences, etc. And so you kind of have to pay attention to those things happening. And then what I do is I dispute the belief. I mean, I literally bring it to mind and say, this thing is irrational. There's no evidence to support it. There's no logic behind this. It's not making any sense. I'll challenge if it's valid, or I'll look for a way to replace it with something that's more rational and more constructive. That's a tool that I took on that works for me, but I think it's really important that people become one thing we're talking about here is self-awareness, knowing yourself, seeing what makes you work, what makes you tick, what do you react to, and what does that reaction look like? And is that the reaction you want to have? As we learn about ourselves, I think we'll find the tools and the skills that resonate with us. And so if something, we've all kind of talked about a different tool or a different way of looking at this thing, and one works for you, Karen, and another works for you, Jason, and this one works for me. We're not all the same. And the tools that we put forward to suggest to people to use might not work for you. You might need to go on your own journey, self-awareness, exploration, and discovery of what does work for you, right?
Yeah, absolutely. 100% agree with that. And we're just spitballing ideas here. And everybody, that's the key thing, is you have to go on your own journey. And that's kind of, actually even helping us tie up with this, is that if all you do is shift from hearing inner asshole screaming, what the fuck is wrong with you, to shifting and using other parts of your brain to ask, what happened here? Let's take a look at why this failed. And if I'm using my analogy of, the inner council of elders or whatever, let's let some other people talk here besides just asshole. Let's let courage talk a little bit. Let's let hope talk a little bit, or whatever, or do your disputing irrational beliefs, right? Shifting from that voice of it. And when you first hear the what the fuck is wrong with you voice, and then you identify that, okay, asshole's talking, let's figure out what asshole is upset about.
Yeah, that's brilliant.
And it's funny, Karen, to hear you talk about the names of the voices on your council, because I asked my question, I'm like, oh, what does experience have to say? What does perspective has to say? What does gratitude have to say? Those are the names of the voices in my head.
Right on.
Well said. Well said.
This has been a Fraser House Society project, hosted by Daniel Snyder, co-hosted and produced by Karen Jansen, managed by Delan Young, from the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Coast Salish peoples. Production of this material has been made in part through a financial contribution of Health Canada. The views expressed herein do not necessarily reflect the views of Health Canada or Fraser House Society. The content of this podcast is conversation between people with living experience and should not be taken as professional advice. Special thanks to Nightingale Electrical for supporting off-the-clock toolbox talk and standing behind our trades folks in the unregulated drug crisis. Help save lives! Go to tradespodcast.com to find tools and tips to promote the podcast on your site with minimal stressors. Like us on socials, Instagram at offtheclock.toolboxtalk. Send us constructive feedback in any form you'd like. tradespodcast@gmail.com. Help us, help you.